This is the Digital Trust Podcast. In every episode, we strive to bring support to those of you who serve on the front lines and in the trenches of data and technology. We endeavor to bring understanding to the under-resourced and underappreciated, help remove your stress, and provide relief to your pain. Welcome to the Digital Trust Podcast. Sit down with us as we give you hard-hitting advisory conversations to help you build digital trust with your stakeholders and clients, and actionable takeaways to help you become a digitally trustworthy organization.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the Digital Trust Podcast. My name is Christian, and we have again with us today Dr. Manfred Boudreaux-Dehmer. He's the CIO of NATO, and we're going to get right into part two. Welcome again, Dr. Manfred.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Awesome. So what I would like to talk about today is something called digital trust, given that it's the Digital Trust Podcast. What does digital trust look like for you in the context of NATO? Thinking specifically about IT, security, data governance, and privacy, all of those kind of areas working together.
I think you've mentioned all of the areas that are really the components of digital trust. So I think digital trust is more than cybersecurity. I think digital trust is, it has a certain tool set, it has a regulatory framework in there, it has, as the name suggests, a trust element between different organizations as they exchange data, whether it's customers with suppliers, or whether it's NATO allies with each other, or a NATO ally with the NATO enterprise, which is what I'm looking after. So all of these things are components of digital trust. I think if we look at companies and in the commercial space, I think digital trust is different from the more kind of traditional cybersecurity aspect, where we try to protect what we have, either through castle and moat or more advanced, newer ways of doing things, zero trust technologies, for example, that are always out of a kind of a protection view. And so digital trust, in my mind, is a competitive asset. It's a competitive advantage that companies have over their customers. And I think it's something that is marketable and that is not just threat informed and risk-based driven, right? But it's really, digital trust is a differentiator, I think, between companies from their competitors. And so from a NATO context, it has a number of components in it. So we believe in always looking at changing and advancing our cybersecurity posture. So a big initiative that we have is zero trust, where you change a more traditional method of just guarding the perimeter of your network with more sophisticated internal processes of not trusting a user as the person comes into the network, and then this trust needs to be reestablished every time you access a particular object within the system. So that in itself is an expression of digital trust, because I just said that every time you want to access an object, you got to reestablish that trust. So it reaches very, very, very deeply into the fabric of the security architecture. You mentioned data centricity as well, and basically data-centric security. And so that is, in my mind, a prerequisite for whether you call it zero trust or whether you call it data-driven security access. So data-centric security really classifies what data is that you want to access, and then the access is being determined based on the data classification rather than just the network perimeter where you would be accessing all of the data. So for data-centric security, we have at NATO a very, very strict way of classifying data based on confidentiality level, right? We've got things that are public, we've got things that are NATO specific but unclassified, we've got data that is restricted or confidential or secret or top secret. And so the data classification for us is hugely important, because we make a very, very big distinction as to how we treat data based on its classification level. And we use very advanced tools in coming up with the classification of data, because that is a perfect area where you can employ artificial intelligence And based on what is in the document, what key terms appear in the document, how is a document structured, you can suggest that that is a more confidential or a less confidential document. So you can actually, as you set up data-centric security, use artificial intelligence to help you greatly in the classification of that data.
When we're talking to IT people, IT leaders, typically the conversation starts with technology, and then we go into security because that's often on the IT leader's radar and the IT department's radar in areas of responsibility. And then eventually, in the months and weeks following, we're able to start talking about the data. It sounds to me that that's the starting point and the central focus for you. Would that be accurate at NATO?
That is accurate. So to start with technology, not good. Earlier in the earlier segment, we talked about the interaction between business and IT and how should the different groups be talking to each other. And I firmly believe that as IT people, we should not be talking to the business in IT terms. We need to learn the language of the business. And when it comes to data governance, data security, digital trust, to start out with the technical concept of how you guard the data, I think is the wrong end to start out with. I think ultimately we will end up there because you need technology in order to make it stick in your system, right? You need technology in order to put the security parameters in place. But I think the starting point needs to be data. What is it? So I think the first question when a business leader comes and says, okay, I have this database that I've kind of built over time and it has this data in it, let's talk about it. And so really the technical ramification of what was built comes last, and what the data is comes first. And here there's also a really, really interesting thing, because we sometimes think of data very black and white, product marketing data, not so sensitive. And then customer data, depending on what attributes they are, more sensitive. Sometimes the same data can have different sensitivity levels from a trust perspective based on its aggregation. So the individual data records that you have on a particular subject area, they might be not that confidential or not that sensitive by themselves. But the moment you roll something up and you gain strategic insights into a competitor, for example, in a private setting, or into particular vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the network, then becomes highly sensitive. So it's interesting that the data-centric security and the data classification level can really vary based on the aggregation level of data.
That completely makes sense. So we're talking about starting with the data, talking about security, we're talking about technology, we're getting into data governance there as well, and using AI to classify the data, the sensitivity levels, and then there's the privacy aspect as well. Mm-hmm. Now, I think of two buckets there, the big data bucket and the personal data bucket. How does privacy kind of work in your point of view and in your context at NATO?
For personal data, so we have a lot of there are frameworks in place. So a lot of companies are either following GDPR or equivalents from other jurisdictions. We are there. We're a little bit different in that we're not a European organization, right? We're really not subject to GDPR in that way. We're an alliance of 32 allies from European and non-European nations. I think we've got 8 or 9 countries that are not in Europe. Biggest ones, of course, US and Canada, with our allies in North America. So what we did is we basically borrowed heavily from existing frameworks, but we came up with our own framework. So we very recently had a big push on personal data protection. The policy is in place. We've across NATO have a directive as to how we implement it. And NATO consists obviously of the 32 allies, but then also the NATO enterprise, which is kind of the headquarters and the military and different agencies and research institutions that are operated by NATO. So for that, we've got directives in place to make sure that we continuously push and update our personal data protection policies.
Is refreshing, Manfred, that you as the CIO have such an in-depth awareness of things from a privacy perspective. It just shows that it's not done in silos from your perspective, and I would really like to see that across the private and the public sector as well. I want to just end on, because I think we have time for maybe one more topic, and that is actually getting a little bit into the technology. So when we're looking at a lot of companies out there, you're talking about legacy environments with legacy systems and traditional networks. How is that from an IT infrastructure standpoint and a security standpoint for you? What are the challenges there, and where should they be going to modernize IT and go into that sort of digital transformation process?
NATO had its 75th birthday on April the 4th, so we are not a very young organization, and so we have organically grown over 75 years since 1949. And what that means is we're also pretty federated, one would say decentralized from an IT perspective. So we do have a plethora of systems that are there. You would see that in organizations of this age and kind of in this with this diverse profile. So we do have a large legacy environment, and really the big wave of pushing things forward is digital transformation. So we embarked on a big digital transformation effort. Part and parcel to that is the cloud. We're moving lots and lots of services into the cloud. And there would be a public part of the cloud for less sensitive data. And then there is a private part of the cloud that is kept separate for the more sensitive data. As you can imagine, it will make a big distinction of that. So really for us, the catalyst to get out of a lot of the technical debt and the legacy systems is moving things to the cloud as aggressively as we can. And so that's the state that we're in right now. We've moved the first system over. We've got lots and lots, of work to do. And in the meantime, we build fortifications and kind of deal with the existing system landscape to make sure that it operates securely and reliably going forward. But yes, many organizations, including us, are in a very big digital transformation effort.
Well, I really appreciate you pulling back the curtain for us and for giving us that transparency with NATO. Very, very helpful, very applicable in terms of your lessons learned in the process that you're going through. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And I just want to thank the viewers and listeners for being part of this conversation and for spending your time with us today.
Thanks for joining us today on the Digital Trust Podcast. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with someone you care about. And if you'd like to receive our monthly newsletter, please click the link in the description to subscribe. And to put your mind at ease, our newsletter will include episode summaries with key points and actionable takeaways, plus a heads up on the upcoming episode guests. Rest assured, it won't be a spammy sales message, and we will never sell or share your information. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode.